everybody, Isaiah Colton here with another episode of Sales and Marketing Secrets podcast. And today we're going to be talking about the art and science of closing the deal. And this is one of my favorite topics because at the end of the day, we can do everything else right. But if we can't influence somebody to work with us instead of our competition, we're going to be out of business as fast as we got into it. So it's so important. And then also too, it's just a skill set that I think that is undervalued. And a lot of times when we think about closing the deal, we think about used car salesmen, we think about the hardcore closer mindset and whatever it may be. And those thoughts kind of come to our head. But at the end of the day, in today's world, it's exactly the opposite of what you think it is. Closing the deal, all the conceptions that you see, the boiler room, the different things like that, it's actually complete opposite. It actually starts with rapport and trust. And I can't think of anybody better that just loves people and is just amazing at building rapport and trust and separating herself from her competition than Chrissy Young. And I'm excited to have her on this podcast, talk through this topic. So welcome, Chrissy.
Thank you. Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. That's very nice of you to say. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And so before we dive into today's session, just to kind of what qualifies us a little bit to talk about this is that Chrissy, I think you're top 10 listing agents in your area. Is that fair? Am I getting that right?
We're in the top 250. They don't really go below that, but yeah, we're in the top 1% in our state. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And doing well over around like 65, 70 listings a year. Is that about right?
This year we hit 56. So
56 listings. So and in a very competitive market, like you couldn't be talking to anybody better when it comes to closing the deal. And so on my end, this is kind of the one thing that I found is the difference between somebody that has the ability just to be average and somebody has the ability to be great, to influence people. So I took a lot of pride in studying the art and science of closing the deal and all the different elements that went into it. And I got really, really good at it. And I've used the techniques and the systems, and what Chris and I are going to talk about today are the same techniques that I personally use to do 151 transactions our first year in real estate and scale to over 1,000 transactions between our brokerage and a broker referral program, and then also use the same strategy in 2 other businesses. And what's really great is once you get good at working with people, you can understand the psychology of people. These skills are transferable, and they're skills that you basically, it's almost like it becomes a superpower. It's like it's really, really exciting. So if you're if you're a newer agent, loan officer, or maybe you haven't listened and been tuning in lately to the market changes and how people communicate, it's time to recalibrate. It's time to make sure that we recalibrate ourselves and how we think, and more importantly, our strategies. So kind of diving in, Chrissy, one of the things that I think a lot about when I hear the art and science of closing a deal, a lot of people are like, oh yeah, if I just had the right words to say at the end of the close, and if I just had the magical swag, and I just was I was a smooth talker, and I think that's a lot of people think that's those things that are required to close the deal. And I'm not saying that those things don't help, but would you agree that closing the deal actually starts with, at the very, very beginning, with rapport and trust? So would you agree with that?
100%. And that's how I always start everything, is find common ground and build rapport.
Yeah. So what does that look like to you? Because I think that a lot of people hear that and they're like, okay, yeah, you can say that, but what do you do? Let's say that you're out on a listing appointment. What are you doing? What's going on in your head to build rapport and find common ground? And what's going on in your mind when you walk up to the front door?
There's a couple of things. So I'm a big believer that what you think about, you bring about. So, and you talk about this a lot too, Isaiah, your North Star, kind of knowing where you want to go. If you know where you want to go, what your goal is, what your mindset is, that's something you're always, and Brian, who, coaches me, he talks a lot about how, we've got to let our subconscious mind do the work as well. Like, so if we're always setting that mindset and thinking about it, we're setting our mind to say, hey, this is what I want. And I don't know, I'm going to quote a lot of people, but I listen to Earl Nightingale all the time. And and The Strangest Secret is my favorite podcast. That it's not a podcast because it was from the 60s, but I listen to that repeatedly. But what he says in there that's powerful to me is, you can't get to something if you don't know where you're going. You have to know where you're going. So before I go to a listing appointment, I visualize and think about, where am I going and what am I doing? And the other thing that's really important to me, and I feel like is a big deal about building rapport, is I align with part of where I'm going and what my purpose is to help other people. So I'm like, put my ego aside, go in there with full intention to just help people. What is it that person needs? And let me move my thoughts aside and, oh, it's not just about getting the win. What is their need? What do they really, really need? And listen. That's huge. Listening, we don't do that as salespeople very often,
I love it. So takeaway number one, if you're listening to this, is your intention.
Yes.
So takeaway number one is your intention. If your intention is to go in there and you don't have the mindset that you're truly there to help, okay, then you're already starting off on rocky ground. And what happens is people sense that. People sense that whether you just care about the commission, I call it commission breath, right? Where like all they care about is getting the deal. They can sense that, right? And they can also sense an authenticity where if you're showing up and you're truly there to help and build value, and that's kind of rule number one, no matter what, whether it's one-on-one or I'm on stage, I have the same mindset. I go in there where my number one objective is to add value any way that I can to the relationship that is in front of me. And so, and I love that you have that mindset. So how does that carry out? And how does that play out when it comes to actually doing your presentation?
Well, so when I get there, I always show courtesy to them and just their home too. So I know that sounds like a simple little thing, but when I come to the home, I immediately walk in, I remove my shoes, I thank them for the opportunity to be in their home, and I find something immediately that I can find in my home that I can genuinely say, I like,
Yeah.
And I look for that, and you can always find something.
There's always something. Yeah.
I love that picture and how it offsets, the color that you've painted your walls. Like, that is stunning to me.
Right.
And the part is being genuine, right? I don't say it just to say it, to be a salesperson, because step one, do this. Step two, do this. I'm like, the part that really is important is aligning with your value. I want to serve this person. I want to be genuine. I want them to feel better when I leave this house. Even if I don't get the deal, I want them to say, wow, that was a great visit. I feel better about myself. Like, how can I impart that to them? So I genuinely say that. And here's the thing I tell my kids all the time: our hearts know truth. Like, when I tell them certain things, I'm like, you're going to listen to me because your heart knows truth. Whether you don't want to hear it or not, your heart knows truth. And so if we come from a place of truth and honesty and we say, I love that painting, this is amazing, thank you for having me in your home today, Colt. I just called you Colton.
You can call me whatever you want, Chrissy. I love you. I love you so much. You can call me Freak. It's okay. So number two, I think the second lesson that I'm hoping that anyone that's listening to this podcast just took away is finding common ground through something that is sincerely common ground, or something that you like in the home. And the home is an extension of a person in a lot of ways. So even though you're not complimenting the person directly, you actually are, because there's an emotional attachment, a really, really strong emotional attachment to this person. It's called their home. That's why selling a home is a totally different experience than buying one, right? And so by her complimenting something in the house, she's actually complimenting the homeowner directly without complimenting the homeowner directly. So that's, I think, lesson number two is make sure that you find something that you genuinely like about the house and compliment them, because there's so much, compliment them on it because there's so much psychology there. I love it. So how else does this come out when with this mindset of wanting to add value, truly being there to help? How else does this come out in your presentation and before you get to the close?
Well, then the next step is I just ask them if they would be so kind to, so I've complimented the home, they're grateful. And then I say, would you allow me an opportunity to see the rest of your home?
Mhm.
And so they're like, oh, okay. I've had a
Yep.
couple of people who are like, oh, it's kind of a mess or different things. So you always have to just work around. But generally, I'm usually so good at making them feel comfortable that even the house is a mess, they're like, okay, you can come see my home. I've got like, not everybody can do this, but I can't believe I'm going to announce this on your podcast, but I was raised by a hoarder. My mother was a hoarder, and that's a
Okay.
unique little side story
Yeah.
about my life. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so nothing surprises
Nothing
me.
phases you. So it's
And so
genuinely like, yeah, you're like, hey, look, nothing's gonna surprise me. Trust me.
exactly. And it's so interesting when because there are homes that I've gone into that are on that borderline, or and it's a little offsetting for some people. For me, it's not. I've lived in that, so and so they feel that energy. And then and what I can say in that moment too is, oh, I was raised by a hoarder. I get this. Life can
Right.
just be overwhelming sometimes, can it?
Yeah.
I'm here
Yeah.
to help you. And I have people who can help you. Let's go through the home, you
So
know?
I love what you're saying too. I think the third lesson that I'm picking up is making sure that they feel comfortable and you're disarming anything that is worrying them about walking through the house, right? So you don't want to break rapport, you're building trust and you're disarming them so they don't feel some sort of way. And you're now becoming somebody that is a stranger to somebody that they can trust.
Right. And I think that's the thing, and just helping them, like, you can feel their energy. You can feel when they're nervous and you're scared. And so I speak to that. I don't like try to ignore it, and I don't necessarily try to make them feel better. I speak to it. Oh, I
Mm,
can see that you're nervous because da da da. Can you tell me more about that? What's going on? And then
yeah,
listen with compassion, kindness, understanding, right? So
yeah, it's really good. I love it. Love
so
it,
we
love
go
it.
through the home and we do that. And then usually I'll sit down and again compliment things, talk about the pros that I see about it, tell them about the market, just do, but I try to keep that pretty short. And then I flip it back on them and say, I know a lot of people just say they just want me to come by and just give them their opinion. So Isaiah, you called me today to come by and just see your home. It's beautiful. We kind of talked about what the market's doing a little bit and the pros and cons of that. Tell me, why did you want to think about even selling your home? What is your reasoning? And then you
Mm.
listen. And that is the biggest key. Keep your mouth shut and that's hard for me to do. You know that I love to talk.
Yeah, we all
I
do.
love to talk,
Yeah, yeah.
but I build better rapport by listening.
And that's lesson number 4 is you need to listen. Like what's happening right now, you got a million things spinning through your mind. But here's the thing, when you ask them why they're doing something, there's there's so much there's so much going on in what they're saying. And there's probably one or two different layers into what they're saying. There's the surface level of information of what they're telling you. That's layer number 1. Layer number 2 is what they think they mean that they're not telling you. Okay. And then layer number 3 is the truth, which most likely is not in what they're saying, but you can catch if you're paying enough attention to what is really going on in their mind. And most of the time with whatever they tell you, there's truth in it, but the real reason is 2 or 3 layers deep, and you can't catch it unless you're listening. Would you agree with that?
Oh, I agree 100%. And I love when you just said that on layers, it just actually gave me a vision of something that I hadn't thought about before. And that is, I just know to listen. But when you talked about the layers, the first layer is, I don't know you, I don't trust you, I'm a little bit nervous,
Right.
right?
Yep.
And then you're listening to them. And then as they're like testing it out and you're listening. And if you're really coming with the attitude of, I'm here to serve you, and I'm going to be compassionate and kind, they're going to feel that energy return to them as they're nervous. And then they're going to let go a little bit, and they're going to be a little bit more comfortable, and they're going to go a little bit deeper. All three levels is the truth. It's just, how much do I trust you to tell you how I really feel versus what I want you to know? Right?
That's so powerful. That's so powerful.
Yeah.
And so now that you've gotten information, where do you go next now that they've told you why they're moving? Where are you going next? Or why they want
Okay, so
to
when
sell?
they tell me why they're moving, I actually listen and try to get the deeper meaning to it. And then I actually just say, I want to make sure I understood you and I heard you correctly.
Mhm.
And I actually will start with the surface a little bit too. And I'll
Yep.
be like, you're just
Yep.
thinking about moving. You're not sure when. You're thinking 3 to 6 months. No pressure there. You're feeling a little overwhelmed because there's a lot to do to get ready and there's a lot of burdens. But you have medical issues going on, and this home is not going to meet your need anymore. Is that correct? And then they feel heard,
Yes.
you know?
Heard is, and that's, I think the next lesson here is to make sure that people feel heard. I call it repeating and reframing, but when you don't do this and you just move on and they tell you why, and they don't feel validated or heard, then basically anything else that you say after that is going to go on deaf ears.
Absolutely.
Because more than anything, people need to feel heard and understood. It's more than anything. It's like one of the deepest layers of human nature, that and what happens in the subconscious mind is, if a person doesn't feel understood and they don't feel heard, okay, it's very, very hard to get along with anybody when you don't feel understood or heard. I mean, think about other relationships that we're in. The second we don't feel heard or understood with people that we know, what do? Doesn't end up pretty. Usually ends up in a fight, right? That ends up with the significant other sleeping on the couch, right? So it doesn't usually end up good. Now, obviously, in relationships like this, they're not going to act that way, but you better believe they're thinking it, right?
Mhm.
So that's the next lesson that I'm hoping you pull out of this podcast, is making sure that people feel heard and understood based on what they're telling you. And
Yeah.
here's the thing, hopefully you guys are catching these key lessons, because a lot of people don't understand that you can have the perfect words, you can have a great objection cycle, and you can do all these different things, but you're not closing anything if you don't have this structure in place before it. Like everything else leading up to it is what's important. Anything else, Chris, you want to mention before we get into the actual closing part, so that they feel heard? Now, where do you go next?
They feel heard. I ask them if it's correct. And then I ask them, do they have any questions for me or any concerns? So it's so easy for me. I feel like this was a rookie mistake I made a lot, is that I talk a lot. I don't always listen. And then I forget to ask them what their needs are or if they have questions along the way. And so I just would say that's something I've had to really be intentional about in my process. I literally go into the house, Isaiah, thinking 2 things. Listen to what they have to say and keep your mouth shut. And really look for how you can help them, Chrissy. Like, really listen and help. Because can I make a difference and be impactful with them today? Absolutely, as long as I keep my mouth shut and listen. Like, that literally has to be a pep talk I have to tell myself. But when I listen to them, I usually end up asking if they have questions. And that goes deep in a lot of ways. You find out a lot more. So I just say, make sure you ask questions. Like, don't be so quick to move on to the next thing. Make sure you really feel like all of that has been addressed.
That's good. That's good. And now you've pretty much gone through your presentation. There's a couple issues always to deal with at the end, and objections come out. And let's talk about the process to handle a concern or a question the right way and the wrong way, and then we can get into some different different strategies to keep the conversation moving and to move the deal into paperwork.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about the difference between a question and an objection.
Okay.
So I think a lot of times when people are asking questions at the end, especially, it can come across as an objection, and we can like get in this big long-winded explanation when literally, and we think we're overcoming a problem when literally it was like just a question. It's so like right, like it's
We
like
get in our own heads. Oh, here we go. They're gonna back out. They're gonna back out. Yeah.
yeah. Like, so like, how do you compartmentalize and like, how do you process that? Like, a question versus an objection.
And I know not everybody's like this, so I don't know if I'm going to give you the best answer. I read the room, and I let my emotions interpret a lot, not just what we're talking about. So body language tells me a lot. And so
Right.
I'm reading the room and
That's
just
good.
and what the energy level is. So if it's a question, it feels lighter, and so I can answer it lightly. If it's an objection, it feels heavier to me.
Right.
I don't know if that's a great way to explain that.
Yeah, you'll kind of sense that
Yeah.
it's heavier. So you'll
So
Cool.
if it's a question, you answer it quickly, you know?
Yeah, and I think it's important, just like you just said, is the lesson here is to make sure that you're not overcomplicating what could just be a question, right? And saying too much. And a lot of times we can do that just in general, when even if it is an objection, we can say too much. So a lot of the things that I think a lot of the things that, like, when I'm processing this, there's different ways to kind of handle objections, different strategies to go after it. I think one of the things that is really, really important, that I'm hoping the audience draws from, is that when somebody gives you an objection, it's really, really important to how you respond to that initial objection. And so I think the tendency is that we want to just give a response or give an answer to their objection, and half the time we're thinking through what our response is going to be, and we're kind of like twitching underneath the desk while they're talking, right? And we're not really listening. And it goes back to a little bit about what we talked about, but like, when somebody gives you an objection, what's the first thing that you do before you actually respond to the objection? We might have talked about this a little bit, but
Okay. Well, there's a couple things. When I get an objection and it feels heavy, again, I'm a person, full transparency, you know me. I just call people on it, but not in a bad way.
right.
I just say, whoa, you feel really strong about that. Tell me more about that feeling and emotion around that. Why do you feel so strongly about that? Like, what's going on?
That's
And
good.
just I just address it,
That's so good. Yeah. I love it.
And some people get frustrated with that because they don't want to go deep with me.
Us.
So they'll be like, oh, she just thought that I'm really emotionally attached to this, and I'm really blah, 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 and I don't want to tell her. And so sometimes that actually is kind of it's unsettling and upsetting. And then I say, you know what? You haven't known me very long. You might not want to share that with me, and that's okay. Would you like me to try and answer that a little bit, or have you made up your mind?
That's good. That's
You
good.
know?
So you try to draw out more information
Yeah.
before you're giving a response to kind of see what you're dealing with, is what I'm hearing. Like,
Yes.
so you might ask them a question, you're trying to figure out and dig down to the root cause of what they're saying. And then let's say they answered it. What do you say? What do you do next after they answer?
Well, how do you want them to answer me? Are they in a positive?
Yeah. So let's say they're like, let's say they're like, well, there is a lot to unpack, and I'm considering moving, but I'm really, really, really fearful because of the health issues that we're having, if this is the right time to move.
So, Isaiah, thank you for sharing that with me. I'm sure it's not easy to want to tell people everything that's going on in your life. And
Yeah.
I know you haven't known me very long, but let me tell you who I am. I love helping people, and I'm a connector, and I know
Mhm.
a lot of people. And part of what you're feeling is your health issues. And then you just now are thinking, I might have to move, but I also don't feel good. And I
Mhm.
have, and I have to paint the house and do all these things. Is that correct? Is that how you're feeling right
Yeah,
now?
I'm thinking about all the things that are gonna go into me having to deal with this right now.
So really good news is I have a group of people I work with. And the other thing is I love helping and serving people and making this the best that I can for you. And I can carry this burden for you. I can't take your health issues off your plate and all of that, but I do know how to sell a home. I do have people who can come in and organize and clean and paint and do all that. And that might feel overwhelming because you have medical expenses, but I can help with that too. And let me just tell you some of the solutions we have. And then let's see if any of this feels good to you and like it's the right fit. Would that be okay?
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds fine.
Okay.
Cool. And then you keep the conversation going
Yeah.
and go from there. Love it. And here's the thing. I want to kind of end off here because uh that probably would never come out if you didn't do all the things that you're talking about in the beginning. They probably never would have told you the real reason why they don't want to sell, or they're thinking about waiting, or whatever it may be. And that's the big overall arching idea of this podcast, that closing the deal starts with how you open the conversation. And um and then the next part is that I think another mistake too that people make is, if people are worried about, pressuring somebody into a sale, and it is a valid concern, but the only way that will come across as if you're pressuring somebody into a sale is if you're not using the right tone, and the right language and the right process. So if you do what Chrissy does and says, would you feel like that was pressuring somebody into the deal? No. She's showing genuine concern. She's showing compassion. She's saying things that are connecting. And so for those of you that are looking to master the art and science of closing, it's knowing what to say and how to say it and when to say it. And so, and that takes a lot of practice. That takes being in the right environment. That takes repetition. That takes awareness of what it takes to master the art and science of closing the sale. And I think that the most important part, I want to end here, is, and I think this is the biggest mistake, is that I'll see agents give amazing responses, but then they just kind of leave it hanging. Like, it just kind of, oh, great. Yeah. And it's almost like we're in agreement, but you essentially went from becoming a stranger to now becoming a trusted advisor. And now, because you've said that this is what you do, and that you're willing to take on the burden, that you're taking, this is your expertise. Now they're seeing you as an expert. And now subconsciously, the human mind needs and wants to be led, especially when it's in the unfamiliar territory. It's just what happens. So you can't expect them to lead themselves into the deal. I hope you heard that. I'm going to say it again. You can't expect them to lead themselves into doing the deal with you. It's not going to happen. Okay. So oddly enough, part of being a great closer is being a great leader.
Yes.
It's leading them in the direction that they need to go, that's beneficial for themselves. And it just so happens to benefit you too.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes back to the mindset. And so how that manifests and how that comes out is, when you give your response, ask them if they're in agreement. Does that make sense to you? Can you see that playing out in your favor? Can you see that if we had everything lined up and this wasn't going to be a big headache for you, and we have great communication, and I walk you through this process, that it would make sense to do something a little bit sooner than later. And once you get that agreement, okay, great. Let me walk you through the process. That's the missing link. And it's so simple and so subtle, but I've trained hundreds and hundreds of real estate agents, thousands at this point, hundreds and hundreds of inside sales agents, B2B, B2C. And it's crazy how many people leave the deal hanging right there. And they say things instead of getting agreement, they say things like, okay, great, this has been a good discussion. Let's think about it. Or, hey, what do you think? What are your thoughts? What's going on? Like they're leaving this thing open end instead of just being in agreement.
Mm-hmm.
Getting into agreement and then enrolling and enroll them into the next part of the process. Just go to the next part of the process. And here's the thing, if they stop you or they're not in agreement, then it's really simple. You start the process again. You go back to the beginning. And if you're doing this the right way, you won't feel pushy. You'll still maintain rapport, and you're actually problem solving. And you can say something like, okay, if we're, okay, I get it, totally understand. Let me ask you, is there something that I missed? What do what do you mean? Well, we had talked about this, we had agreed that this was going to work out. And then you just see if there's something else that you're missing, if there's another layer there. And quite frankly, you can, you have to be willing to go through this process two or three times. I see the best of the best, they go through this process maybe even 4 or 5 times. Now, there's some scenarios, and this is where reading the room that Chrissy mentioned. You read the room, and you can sense that if it starts getting a little tense and they're being genuine with you, then you read the room, and then you decide if it's appropriate to follow up. Mm-hmm. Right? And you look but you got to make sure you're finding the balance of not closing the deal because you're afraid and reading the room. There's 2 different things. Those are 2 totally different things, right? Is that you're afraid to ask them the tough questions, or you're afraid to dig a layer deeper, right? Because you don't want to offend them. There's a huge difference between that and reading the room to say, okay, this is getting really intense. I feel there's pressure. I gotta relieve some of this pressure here. And also knowing, like, if there's no motivation there, they're like, no, like no matter what, I'm not going to be selling for 6 months, right? You're going to handle that a little bit differently, right? And you're going to have a different process. So, but I think that there's more commissions lost because of the art and science of closing the deal, and they end up working with your competitors, then you have to risk by going a layer deeper.
Ooh, I think that's so powerful. I had never thought about that way. And, this is an area that I'm learning from you, and that has been phenomenal. That just adds another layer to my business. But going.
Yeah. And I want to say it again for our audience, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay? There's more commissions lost.
Yeah.
Because you're afraid to go a layer deeper than could ever be gained by following up.
So true.
So just
in my business too, even
look, all of us. Well,
I'm like,
but it's the truth, right? And so I want you to keep that in your mind, is that because of your fear of losing the deal, your fear of offending them, your fear of asking the wrong question, or how the room feel, like all the different things, there's more commissions lost because of our own fear than anything that we could ever gain by being nice and following up with them. Being nice.
Yeah.
So, and so I think that that's the power in becoming a great closer. It's actually becoming all the things that you wouldn't think of that is involved with a great closer: a listener, somebody who cares, somebody who asks the right questions, somebody who's willing to get the agreement, someone who's willing to ask the tough questions. That's what makes a person a good closer, because the close is actually just part of the process when you do all those things the right way. So, Chrissy, anything else you want to add before we close out?
No, I think like what you just ended with is so powerful for me. I appreciate the opportunity being on here, because I just literally just set the goal in my head. I'm going deeper next time. I'm going to push a little harder. So thank you. I
Awesome.
appreciate that. That was awesome.
You're welcome. And thank you for sharing your insight, because there's so many people that don't even have a chance to get to the close, or to earn the deal, or to ask to draw the truth out of the situation, because they're not using the strategies that you shared. So thank you for coming onto the podcast, and I can't wait for our listeners to hear this. I can see them all. They're all going to be taking notes while they're listening, because there's so much gold in here. So thanks a lot for joining the podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you. That's been awesome. Thanks.